Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on the role of construction in the economic recovery of South Africa, hosted by Construction Alliance South Africa and proudly sponsored by RIB, CCS and AfriSam. I'm Shannon Derejo from Creamer Media's Contract Publishing. To encourage interaction, we have enabled the chat and the Q&A function. Please post all your questions into the Q&A box, which you'll find on the panel at the bottom of your screen. You can also interact with the panelists and other attendees in the chat box, which you will also find at the bottom of your screen. Please be informed that we are recording this webinar and it will be available to the delegates as required. We're also streaming the webinar live on YouTube. We will be having an MC who will be joining us in a few minutes, but in the meantime, we can get started. I'm going to hand over to Gregory Mofokeng for the opening remarks. Gregory is the Vice President at the Black Business Council. He is also the CEO of the Black Business Council in the built environment. He is the Deputy Chairman of the Construction Industry Association's umbrella body, the Construction Alliance South Africa. He serves on the South African Council for the Landscape Architectural Profession and the Construction Sector Charter Council. He is the chairman of Tysis Capital Group, Tusk Construction Support Services, and M2G Investment Holdings. He serves on the board of Macheko Construction Group. He also serves as the president of the BIM Institute. So now I'm going to hand over to you, Gregory. I know you have a presentation to share, so I'll share that now, and then we can go ahead.
Thank you very much, Program Director Shannon. Let me take this opportunity to greet all the participants that have joined us this afternoon for this webinar. Let me also take this opportunity to recognize in our midst the Chairperson of Construction Alliance South Africa, Mr. John Matthews, presidents, CEOs, and other office bearers of our member associations and directors of companies and associations that are members of CASA. And once again, welcome to all the participants that have joined us this afternoon. We meet colleagues this afternoon to examine the role of the construction industry in the economic recovery of our country, South Africa. And as we all know, that government has introduced the Economic Recovery and Reconstruction Plan, and that is the plan that is meant to guide the country in order to ensure that we are able, to make our economy tick again, so that we can create jobs and we can allow a space for industry to again, operate efficiently under the current circumstances. It is difficult circumstances, not only for the construction industry, but for other sectors as well. Now, I just wanted to go into the background of the Construction Alliance South Africa so that we can all be up to speed as to how this institution was set up and the background to it all. Construction Alliance South Africa is a historic initiative which has united the construction industry under one umbrella body made up of some 36 professional, contractor, supplier, manufacturer, and other allied industry bodies, essentially covering the entire construction industry value chain. CASA, for short, seeks to address the need for broad-based ongoing collaboration, consultation, and engagement involving relevant industry stakeholders, and is characterized by professionalism, integrity, relevance, fairness, and transparency. Next slide. CASA was established following the outstanding work done by the Construction COVID-19 Rapid Response Task Team, which was initiated to provide a collective construction industry response to the shutdown of all industries imposed through the lockdown restrictions emanating from the regulations promulgated in April 2020. The task team was instrumental in coordinating and presenting a plan to allow the industry to go back to work safely and the industry's thinking on the National Economic Recovery Plan. Following these recorded successes, the industry was in agreement on the need to form an alliance built on the shared goal of rebuilding the sector. Next slide. The industry resolved to form an umbrella body, the Construction Alliance South Africa, and launched it on the 21st of January 2021. And the inaugural chairperson of CASA is Mr. John Matthews, whom I've already recognized. CASA has a mandate to tackle long-standing industry issues that include accelerated transformation of the sector, protection of the industry from subsidized foreign competition, corruption and unethical business practices, and to contribute towards developing a healthy and sustainable industry. Next slide. As I alluded to earlier, colleagues, we are implementing as a country the Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan, the ERRP, and central to the implementation of the ERRP is infrastructure development. And the reason for this is simply because of the significant contribution that the construction industry plays in terms of economic growth and employment creation, and especially to try and include in the implementation of this project the expanded public works programs, so that we can then be able to massify all the programs around employment creation. We all know that as a country, we are really in dangerous territory as far as unemployment is concerned. Our figures are quite high. The situation, colleagues, is completely unacceptable. And I think as the construction industry, we definitely have a role to play in terms of ensuring that our country can reduce the high unemployment rate in partnership with government as we implement the Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan. One of the key tenets of the Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan is to ensure that private sector investment is brought in and crowded in, so that we do not only rely on our public fiscus, as we all know that our fiscus is taking a strain at the moment due to the level of our economic activity as a country. And we definitely do need to include private sector in terms of funding of our infrastructure going forward. Next slide. I do not want to dwell deep, colleagues, in terms of all the challenges that we're experiencing, as we have a panel that will be dealing with the issues and unpacking the challenges that we are experiencing as a sector, and also coming up with some of the solutions. But I thought it important that I highlight some of the challenges that we are experiencing as the industry and that we are getting from all our members across the various associations that are part and parcel of CASA. Number one is a slow movement in the awarding of tenders. This is a very serious problem that we are all experiencing, and we hoped that our government will ensure that the process of awarding tenders is expedited in line with the central role that the construction industry is meant to play as far as our Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan is concerned. Our members are experiencing an ending request for extension of validity on all the tenders that they're submitting. And in some instances, this is going on for between 12 and 16 months, which is definitely not healthy for all concerned stakeholders in our sector. One of the main problems is the cancellation of tenders. And this, of course, is very worrying, because we do spend a lot of resources responding to tenders. And when these tenders get cancelled, it simply means that when they are re-advertised, we again have to spend a similar amount of resources to respond to these tenders. So this is another significant challenge that we're experiencing as an industry. The issue of delayed payment of service providers still lingers on. National Treasury released a report about 2 weeks ago, just painting a very dire picture of what is happening in this instance. That report only contained data from provincial government as well as the local government spheres. But between those two spheres, what has been reported as outstanding or delayed payments amounted to about 8 billion rands. We believe that the situation is even much more dire, but at least we are comforted by the fact that National Treasury is now reporting more extensively on this issue, and we are working together with government, and we will continue to work together with government to find a lasting solution to this issue of delayed payments. I've already alluded to the issue of job losses. We are still experiencing job shedding across the industry value chain. And the sooner the projects are released and awarded, this trend will then be reversed. We are also seeing that as a result of projects not being implemented and introduced speedily into the market, that one of the core programs of the ERRP, which is the development of suppliers to support infrastructure delivery, is also lagging behind, because those suppliers are definitely not getting the orders that are necessary for them to invest in their own capacity to deliver. We are also experiencing delays in the review of the PFMA and the MFMA to facilitate triple Ps. This was a key proposal from the ERRP to ensure that the private sector is incentivized to come and partner with the public sector to ensure that funding is available for infrastructure development. And this review of these policies is quite urgent in order to incentivize government and private sector to work together to facilitate investment. Lastly, colleagues, we are experiencing delays in the enactment of a very important policy, which is the Public Procurement Act. The bill was advertised and gazetted some time back, and the industry did respond and made submissions to government. We're hoping that in the very near future, Parliament will sit, consider all the inputs, and then be able to release and enact the Public Procurement Act, which will assist us, as an industry to meaningfully participate in the infrastructure delivery by government, and to make sure that the process is transparent, as well as expedited. Colleagues, once again, I want to thank you for attending this webinar today. I also want to wish all the panelists and everyone else who will be participating on this webinar good luck, and I hope that we will all benefit immensely from this webinar this afternoon. Thank you very much, Program Director. You are all welcomed. Let's proceed with the program.
Thanks so much, Gregory. Very insightful information there. We're just going to still wait for a little bit for our MC to log in. But in the meantime, I'm going to move over now to our keynote address. And we are going to hear now from Mr. Craig Lembo, who is the Senior Economist for the Bureau for Economic Research. He has been at the BER since 2010. His main focus at the BER is on the construction sector, and he is the editor of the quarterly Building and Construction Report, CIDB SME Business Conditions Report, as well as manager of the BER Building Cost Information Service. Craig is also responsible for analyzing and forecasting trends in fixed investment and has extensive knowledge on the Western Cape economy. Craig holds a Master's of Economics degree and a Master's of Business Administration degree, both from Stellenbosch University. Over to you, Craig.
Good afternoon, everybody. And thank you, Shannon, for that introduction. Thank you also to the organizers for inviting me to share some of my thoughts around the topic of the role of the construction sector in the economic recovery of South Africa. It is an honor for me to be at this forum. I think the industry for a long time has needed a body such as this that can really take up some of the challenge from a united front and from a united perspective, instead of working in silos, essentially trying to look at some of the essential things. I am going to switch my camera off soon so that I can share my presentation, but I wanted to show you also that I've stuck to the dress code of suit and tie. When I was getting dressed earlier, my son looked at me and expected me to walk out of the door, and I said, he asked me, where am I going? And I said, no, I'm actually just going to the office, the home office, and this is where I'm sitting. And from a sunny Cape Town, I trust that you will enjoy some of the insight that I'll be sharing. It may not all be new, but I think it's going to be a nice introduction to the panel discussion and the sessions that will follow today. So I think I'd be a little bit remiss if I don't just discuss some of the latest data that we have at our disposal to the construction sector and the performance of the construction sector. So on Tuesday, we had the release of the latest GDP statistics from Status A for the second quarter of this year, and by and large, the economy fared relatively well. We saw total growth of about 1.2% on a quarter-on-quarter basis. In other words, between the first quarter of this year and the second. So a relative solid showing. However, if you look right at the bottom of the graph, we can see how construction has fared and what's actually transpired with regard to output in the construction sector over between the first and the second quarter of this year, a contraction of 1.4%. Now, I put this slide here simply because we've spoken about the initiatives that's being planned for infrastructure, and they've been widely reported on. But if you look at the actual data and the actual information, the performance of the construction sector is still or the construction sector is still doing quite poorly by way of performance relative even to some other sectors in the economy that may not be benefiting as directly from initiatives announced by the state. To add, and this current performance, or the performance we saw in the second quarter, actually just sort of ties into the trend that we've been seeing for some time. And again, this is not new information to many of you who are in the industry, but I do want to set the scene in this manner. So since 2016, construction output has declined on a quarterly basis 68% of the time, and this includes that 30% fall in output that we saw in the second quarter of last year. We know the factors and the fundamentals behind that particular performance, but it has been a sector that's been contracting for the last 5 years consistently. And it's something that we've really been feeling, or we've been seeing in the data, of course, and we've also, I'm sure, also been feeling as participants in the construction sector what's actually being reflected in this data. Moreover, if you look at GDP as a percentage, or construction output as a percentage of GDP, we went from a high of about 4.2% in 2015 to 2.7% this year. So it's been quite a slowdown. It's been quite a contraction in terms of the spending or the output that we actually pick up in the construction sector. I must highlight that the data that with respect to the construction sector looks only at the contractor side, so building and civil contractors and other artisans, the components which factor in architects and quantity surveyors, those that subsectors would fall under the finance, real estate, and business services sector, including consulting engineers. So while the sort of brick and mortar aspect of the sector accounts for about 7% of GDP, if you add on top of that the rest of the value chain, it does look much higher. So don't be concerned that it looks overly low. What is important from this particular discussion is that major swing between its contribution in 2015 to the contribution that we see now. On Wednesday, we also were privy to the information from the BER. So this is also me taking an opportunity to selflessly promote the Bureau for Economic Research. But we on Wednesday released the RMB BER Business Confidence Index. It's a snapshot of economic activity within the quarter, surveyed in the quarter and published in the quarter. So the latest figure produced just after the release of the second quarter GDP numbers was for the third quarter. And you can see there was a slight tapering off in confidence really at the end of that graph. Confidence fell from above 50, which is typically your neutral level, to 43. But if you look at it in terms of the long-term context, that sort of x-axis denotes the average over the last 2 decades. And you can see that even though we saw the softening in confidence, our economy is more or less on par or on average with its performance over the last 2 decades. So the good news is that we're not underperforming as what has been the case for the most part of the last 5 years as an economy, at least from the third quarter confidence numbers. The bad news is that it has slipped back somewhat from where we were in the second quarter. And again, the devil is in the detail here, because I do want to relate this and move it back to the construction sector, the building sector, and the civil construction sector. And if you look at the subcomponents, so the overall RMBB, our Business Confidence Index, is a composite index of a number of subsectors, which covers roughly between 50 to 60% of total economic activity. And what we have found is that there's been a very important underperformance by the building sector in this quarter's survey results once again. So if you look at the sort of top performing sectors from this particular round of surveys, you can see that retail confidence, wholesaler confidence, so the consumer spending in the economy remains relatively well supported. Similarly for new vehicles sales, which although lower than its second quarter level, still sits quite well supported at close to 50. So those consumer-driven sectors, consumer-related sectors are doing significantly well. It's on the production side of the economy where there is, or those that are more related to investment, where things have struggled once again. And you can see that indicator for building confidence moving from 22 to 18. So the question that we ask for this particular survey to all the respondents, including to those in the building sector, is: are you satisfied with prevailing business conditions? We ask a number of other questions, and I'm sure some of you participate in the survey, and these questions relate to things such as activity and profitability. It's not what comprises of the index. Our confidence index is just on the question regarding satisfaction. And at 18, it suggests that more than 80% of building contractors or builders in South Africa are dissatisfied with prevailing business conditions. And it's quite a negative statistic in itself compared to the long-term average of the building sector, which sits at somewhere around 45 index points, and also relative to the rest of the economy. If you look at how retail, wholesale, even manufacturing has fared. And why I've sort of looked at this particular approach is that the question that's posed is the role of the construction sector in South Africa's economic recovery. But we also need to understand that there's an interlinkage. The construction sector depends on economic growth, and economic growth depends on the construction cycle, on the construction sector. So a sort of virtuous cycle, which constantly ebbs and flows to the benefit of both the sector and both the economy. And what we've been missing is this improvement in the fortunes of the building sector in this particular results, but more broadly the construction sector. I do want to look at particularly the role of the construction sector in the economy along sort of three lines or three points of departure. And I'm sure the panelists later on will embellish a little bit more on this, but I do want to add this to the discussion, or to use this as a starting point for the discussion. The first perspective I want to look at is this concept of potential growth. So it's a very popular concept, an important concept in economic literature. And essentially what potential growth tries to ascertain is the rate of growth that an economy can sustain over the medium term without generating excess inflation. So in other words, how fast can an economy grow before overheating? And a large part of this philosophy or ideology with regard to potential growth is around resource dependency. How much resources are available by way of labor, raw material, and capital stock, and based on that, you get a sense of how fast an economy actually is able to grow. And in the South African example, over the past few years, we've seen a gradual easing in the potential growth rate of our economy, from about 2.5% to 3.5% a decade or more ago. Potential growth in 2019 was sitting only at 0.3%. So if someone had to ask you, and again, this is not the actual growth rate, but if someone had to ask you off the bat, how fast do you think the economy can grow? I mean, if someone in 2019 had asked, how fast can the economy grow? the answer would have been a sort of measly or miserly 0.3% on a year-on-year basis. So it has come down quite significantly from the highs that we saw before the great financial crisis. And it's really struggling to recover. And part of that is because the resources and the capacity in the economy has not really expanded, and as such has not allowed the economy to expand. And here the role of the construction sector is quite acute, and it cannot be understated, the role that construction and infrastructure plays in enhancing the capital stock available to facilitate and enable growth. In other words, the role of the construction sector is not only to contribute to growth directly by actual output, but it is in its ability to enhance the economy's capacity to grow. If you look just at a very simple example that we've been dealing with over the past couple of years, which is reliable energy supply, and it's been the target of quite a number of reforms over the past while. A reliable energy supply by way of increasing investments in renewable energies, or building new plants, or improving the distribution network goes a long way in ensuring electricity supply for the manufacturing sector. So automatically you will see more interest in factories coming up. It increases the supply of electricity to households, to the mining sector, and all of those, or that one sort of intervention, that one investment has the sort of positive ripple effect going through into the rest of the economy. A similar example relates to the building of a new road. In the absence, or once this new road is built, it creates the opportunity for new tourism, it creates the opportunity for new industry, creates opportunities for new residential and non-residential investment by way of office space. So all of that based on the sort of initial intervention that was implemented. And that is the sort of idea or the concept behind potential growth. Because there's now more capital, or because there's more infrastructure, it facilitates the capacity, or it enhances the capacity for an economy to grow. Whether or not the economy grows at that sort of higher pace is a different argument, but it is now able to do so without overheating or without creating any sort of undue inflationary pressures. Now, National Treasury has done quite a bit of work on this, and engagements with National Treasury. They use a very particular approach to thinking about what an economy can grow at. So if you look at the economy perhaps having a baseline growth of about 1.5%, and if you implement the sort of major reforms, the argument is that already you should see economic growth move to above 3%. And these major reforms, I refer to particularly those facets or factors that are identified in Operation Vulundlela, which is about energy, or it's about network industries. It's about energy, water, telecommunications as the most dominant sort of targets for reform or targets for intervention. So already there is a lot of thinking about how or the extent to which infrastructure can potentially lift potential growth of the economy. There are a couple of other sort of infrastructure plans in the works. Many of you would know about this. Many of you may have even been involved in formulating some of these documents. So last year we had the Sustainable Infrastructure Development Symposium in July, and there an investment amount of about 2.3 trillion. In other words, about 230 projects at various stages of the project plan was touted. Now again, the role of the industry there is clear. It's the construction industry that has to drive and physically erect and technically manage the infrastructure which is being touted. And 2.3 trillion is not a small sum of money, and it needs a construction industry that is effective and efficient and capable of handling the sort of infrastructure investments that are being, or the sort of numbers that are being thrown around. In the National Infrastructure Plan, also released a few weeks back, an amount in excess of 10 trillion was mentioned in terms of infrastructure need to meet the targets of the National Development Plan. These are both the sort of targets on economic infrastructure and the targets on social infrastructure. And we are probably going to see more announcements or pronouncements of funding that is being made available for infrastructure works. The next round of the Sustainable Infrastructure Development Symposium is touted for, or is expected to take place in October. And there already some hype is being created about the amount of funding that's available for projects and the amount of funding that is available for infrastructure, and that is infrastructure that the construction sector needs to implement and the construction sector needs to run with. So when we did our estimates in July, we still worked off, or our estimates for potential growth, we still worked off the old figures and the old methodology of Stats SA. You know, we also only had as one major intervention the reform with regard to the amendment of Schedule 2 of the Energy Act, and that was for the lifting of the license requirements for self-generation to 100 megawatts from where it currently was. And just running that sort of reform and running that intervention into our economy and into our model alone resulted in quite a significant upward adjustment in our sort of economic focus, because now we're arguing, well, there's going to be investment in this capacity, and this increased capacity again facilitates new and increased capacity. And our estimates at that stage, so forgive the red line for 2020, that was specifically a COVID-19 year, but you can see there toward the end of our forecast period, we're sitting with potential growth again at 2% and in excess of 2% just with that one particular intervention. But that intervention can only come to being if the construction sector is there to actually build and actually manage those sort of construction projects related to that infrastructure. While we've inputted it into our model, because we know that it is information that is true and that is real and that can have an influence on the economy, whether or not we actually get that off the ground rests on the shoulders of the construction industry. So the role that the construction sector plays should not just be seen in terms of the actual output or the output in any given year or any given period alone, but also how it facilitates output going forward and how it facilitates future growth in the economy around all these ideas and all these plans that are being mentioned, and all these amounts that are being mentioned by way of infrastructure need or infrastructure delivery. The second important role within for the economy or for the construction sector within the economy is sort of socio-economic role, and this is in line with the provision of infrastructure or the provision of social infrastructure. So infrastructure which meets a particular social need. Now, the graphs that I have on the slide are a little bit dated. It comes from the General Household Survey published by Stats SA, and the latest figures for 2019 were published in December of last year, but I've compared that to this, and there isn't much difference between the performance in 2018 and 2019, and you can see there on a number of facets, there's still some work to do. In terms of access to electricity, the percentage of households who have access to electricity or mains electricity in this instance is sitting at about 85%, so there's still quite a gap between when all households have easy access or unfettered access to electricity. Access to piped water still sits below 90% more or less unchanged over the last decade. So these are all facets of socio-economic infrastructure or socio-economic needs which we will not be able to meet if the construction sector cannot play a viable role in actually building the sort of infrastructure that is needed to address these particular concerns. Where there has been a little bit more success is in terms of sanitation and the provision of sanitation or access to improved sanitation. And again, while there has been this improvement over the past few years, there is still a gap between those who have access to improved sanitation and those and the total set of households in South Africa. And again, this can only be achieved, or a higher rate of access can only be achieved with the involvement and with the participation of the construction sector in terms of providing the necessary infrastructure. And it needs to be a sort of strong and vibrant sector, and not necessarily a sector that's sitting with confidence at 18. And I'm not saying that it's misplaced sort of pessimism, but I am also saying that, or highlighting again this interlinked nature, that there are other factors that are also filtering through into the mood and the sentiment within the sector. And I think Gregory touched on some of those points quite acutely earlier. And it will also be addressed by the panel later on. So I'm not going to go into too much depth there. Lastly, also discussed by Greg earlier on, is just the role that construction plays in employment. Now, these figures were also published a couple of weeks ago. And if you look at construction's contribution, or the construction sector's contribution to employment, excluding the agricultural sector, both for the informal and formal sector, you can see it punches well above its weight from an output perspective. So I shared the graph or the numbers right at the beginning, where the construction sector in 2020 accounted for about 2.7% of total output. For employment, it's about close to 10%. So it is a sector that, for example, for every rand that gets spent by the construction sector, more employment is created relative to a rand being spent in another sector in the economy, for example. So there too, the construction sector plays quite a significant role as an absorber of employment. And it's also the type of employment that absorbs, or the type of employment opportunities that it provides. And if you look at just the ratio between formal and informal employment in the construction sector, it is much higher than in other sectors in the economy. It's only exceeded by the retail sector and possibly the agricultural sector. But as I mentioned, these figures are is for employment in the sort of non-agricultural sector in the economy. And you can see there about 35% of those employed in the construction sector are in the informal sector. So it is a sector which is able to more easily absorb that type of labor versus other sectors in the economy. To close off, I'm not sure how I'm doing with time, but I'm assuming I'm over time, because that's usually what economists, the position of economists is. I wanted to share, given the position of CASA as one voice and one body that represents the construction sector, I wanted to share some of the insights from our own survey, or the 2021 Q3 survey results, which I just have to highlight. The actual results are embargoed till the 14th of September, but there's no detail on the results there. But if you do want to refer to some of these answers, and then please wait until the 14th of September. And this is for our entire supply chain. And I've just selected a couple of comments to add to some of the discussions. The first is in terms of the regulatory environment and extensive delays in approvals. the lack of work from government, where it's not enough to sustain professionals, firstly, and second, not enough to attract young individuals making decisions about their futures to really pursue a career in the construction sector. And then probably top of mind is the infrastructure program. And this is what I wanted to sort of also highlight in those first few slides about confidence and about the GDP figures. A country where there's a large-scale infrastructure program underway cannot have confidence at low as 18. So where is that work going to? I mean, if you look at the media, there's lots being said about the other projects are on the way. Yes, the work is on the way, it's ongoing, but it's not really being picked up in the surveys that we conduct. It's not being picked up in the actual national statistics that are supposed to be the official guide of how the economy is faring. Also questions with regard, or concerns with regard to post-COVID-19 recovery, the effect that COVID-19 has had on businesses, tendering activity, but it comes at severely depressing margins. And I think here it's worthwhile to note how sharply construction input costs have risen on the back of higher commodity prices and the scarcity of commodities. Steel, iron, they're tapering now, or the pace of growth is slowing now, but 3-4 months ago it was rising quite substantially. And we also saw our own local measures for construction costs rise in excess of 20% for the civil construction sector. At the same time, tender prices haven't been rising nearly as high. Our estimate for the second quarter BER building cost index, I think, was under 4%. So you're sitting with a sort of 4% growth in accepted tender prices at a time when input prices are almost 20% year on year. So that is such a severely depressing environment. And I think that is also what's being picked up by contractors, and how does a forum such as this try and address this and look for alternatives collectively and take these alternatives to the relevant parties to implement. And then lastly, my favorite comment, and obviously this is from an architect, architecture is not physicists. I think I am actually within my time, and I do want to encourage you, if you have any questions, to please post it in the chat. There isn't time for a Q&A session live, but I will respond in the chat to questions where I am able to quickly provide feedback. But I do encourage you to consult our website and consult the BER's website and our LinkedIn our LinkedIn site. We often share information and data on the construction sector. In fact, on the 14th, as I mentioned, we are going to be publishing our third quarter results for the FNB BER Building Confidence Index. On the 21st, our results for the Civil Confidence Index, and then on the 23rd of September, the results for the latest round of surveys as it relates to building costs in South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Craig. It was very insightful information you've shared. So I've just quickly popped on here to just say that I would like to now welcome our MC, Kelekile Mtetu, who has now been able to join us. She will then take the proceedings forward. But in the meantime, I'll just give you a bit of background. Kile is the founder and CEO at Ntando General Trading, which has evolved into a group of companies trading in the infrastructure, ICT, marine and engineering, and manufacturing and skills development sectors. She also currently serves on various boards, including the SHRA, JBCC, and CASA. Kile is an activist for the empowerment of women, lobbying for their participation in the mainstream economy of South Africa. So now it's over to you, Kile. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, my co-pilot, for having kept the fires burning in my absence. Ladies and gentlemen, very, very warm welcome to all of you and good afternoon. My name is Kile, as introduced, and my apologies for having joined this meeting a bit later. Unfortunately, I had a doctor's appointment that ran over time, and it's something that I could not miss. So I am here now, and I see that you have been in very much safe hands of my colleague, and we will be moving on with our program. But first, before we even get there, let me just send our appreciation to Mr. Limbo for having given us an overview of the economic state of the country as far as construction sector is concerned. As I'm sure it has been alluded even earlier on before my time here, that construction is actually the largest employment creator, when it comes to infrastructure, alongside the agriculture and tourism. So the decline that Mr. Limbo is talking to of about 68% actually makes a lot of sense, because we must say that the scourge of the COVID-19 is actually not helping our situation. We've also seen the looting that has happened over the recent events that have taken place in the country, that our problems are actually piling up and piling up. And he also further indicated that construction is actually part of the ecosystem of the economic growth, and they're quite interdependent on each other. The more the economy is growing, the more construction we need. The more the construction is actually needed, the more the economy grows. Sadly, we are talking about the drop of the potential growth from a 2.3 to 2.5 to about 3.5% to a whopping 0.3% in 2019. So all that it means is that our problems actually did not necessarily start in 2020, but they started a bit a year before we got into the COVID state. Be that as it may, as they say, around every dark cloud, there is a silver lining. The situation that we're going through is not that so gloomy, and it's not even the end of the world. We are seeing that there is going to be potential arise of new sectors of economy. He's actually talking about the ABT being also part of the situation that we could look at, and new economies that we're going to be looking into the country, the circular economy and the energy sector as well. It's interesting because I'm noting on the chats the debate that is going on about the ABT, with some school of thought saying that given the employment rate at more than 7.2 million people that are unemployed in this country, the ABT may not necessarily be the only solution. We 100% agree. But on the other hand, we have got a serious backlog of service delivery that would also require that we look into the new ways of doing things. In any case, we slept and we woke up one day being hit by COVID-19, and the fourth IR that we've been waiting for is actually at the door. So whether we like it or not, we're going to have to move with the times, and what any other better way of looking at it except for preparing ourselves in terms of the skills that we're developing for the ABT that we are talking about. The other positive point that I'm noting is the fact that at least from the SITS projects, there's about 2.3 trillion that has already been touted for about 270 projects. That is a positive. So it means at some stage we will recover, the economy will recover, and even our sector will definitely recover. Let alone the fact that we have got the NIP 2050 that is also out there, and we are at least envisaging about 6 trillion that is going to be required for us to ensure that the NDP targets are being met. So contractors and the players in the space, just brace yourself, get yourself ready. There is that silver lining around the cloud. Let's take this time that has been given to us, maybe to recover, to recoup, to go back to the drawing board and think about what is it that needs to be done differently before we've had all of these scourges. And lastly, I think the transformation agenda should be should form the central part of every initiative and every effort or implement that we are going to be looking into in terms of earmarking the situation of promoting and improving the economic recovery. And here I'm talking about things like your gender sensitive kind of procurement and a deliberate effort in including and ensuring that there is inclusion of your targeted groups. And needless to say that because I am an activist for women, there was no way that I would miss this opportunity without reminding us that there are targeted groups. But without any further ado, let me move on with our program. We are now going to be starting with our panel discussion. And with our panel discussion, we have got our beautiful, wonderful facilitator, whom I actually refer to her as a superwoman. She is not just a woman, she is a brilliant woman who is able to multitask in all forms of facets that we can be able to think about. Not only does she only look after CASA, she looks after MBA, KZN, but the most interesting part is that in between all of these meetings and preparation, she still is able to go back and remember that she's a wife, she's a mother, and that needs to go and look and cook meals for her children and her family. Her name is none other than Vikashni Habajan. She is the Executive Director of the Master Builders KwaZulu-Natal. She is an admitted attorney and conveyancer of the High Court of South Africa. She holds a master's degree in law and is currently enrolled for the PhD. Vikashni has held several senior positions, including designation at Netlec and Busa, and has gained experience on several boards and councils. Vikashni was awarded the ASOKSA Leadership Award for demonstrating consistent, ethical, and exemplary leadership in the construction industry. She was also the recipient of the CEO Global Africa's Most Influential Women in Business and Government Country Award, SADC Region Award, and the Africa Continent Award in the agencies and regulatory authorities sectors. Ladies and gentlemen, please let us give a warm welcome to Vikashni Habajan to take us through the next section. Over to you, Vicky. Thank you.
Good afternoon to all of you on this historic day as we talk to the construction industry with a unified construction voice. Thank you, Madam MC, for that really wonderful introduction as we head into the panel discussion, bringing together thought leaders, industry experts, and relevant stakeholders. And it's our quest to unpack the role of construction in the economic recovery of South Africa. So the format of the panel discussion will now appear on the screen. Thank you. Okay, as you know, the South African construction industry was on a downward spiral from around the first quarter of 2018. Now, we experienced reduced infrastructure spending, we had a depressed economy, and what we found was that there was low investor confidence during this time, and we had rising material costs and among other factors. And then in 2020, the economic forecasts remained bleak. We had a slow pace of structural reforms, high rates of unemployment, and rating downgrades. Now, these challenges were further exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, which my colleagues have already referred to. And as you all know, this has thrown the global economy into turmoil. Closer to home, the recent unrest in July this year has had a detrimental impact on an already decimated economy. So the construction industry, colleagues, is regarded as a key contributor to the economy. It provides approximately 7% of job opportunities in the formal sector and 17% in the informal sector as per stats in 2020. Now, it is through investment in infrastructure that we can contribute to the economic growth, job creation, and other socioeconomic aspects in a country. I do want to reiterate the words of John Matthews spoken at the CASA launch. I think it's very important, John. He said that the need for unity in the sector cannot be overemphasized. We are not only confronted with the enormous challenge of rebuilding the construction industry out of the rubble of COVID-19, but also to make it more inclusive, transformed, innovative, and competitive. It also unifies and amplifies the voice of the industry and broadens the channel of communication with government, particularly at this time when construction is taking the lead in the economic recovery of South Africa. Now, this panel discussion seeks to discuss the role of construction in the economic recovery of the country. How can the sector contribute to unlocking the economy? We have an outstanding lineup of speakers for you today, and I'm honored to present to you our panelists for this session. We have Professor Miriam Altman, who is a recognized thought leader, strategist, and economist, and she has deep experience in economic policy research and has driven major transformation initiatives. Miriam was a national planning commissioner in the presidency, and she was leading work on the economy and infrastructure, and she's presently leading the drafting of the National Infrastructure Plan 2050, Kile has referred to that, and that has been recently circulated for comment. Miriam is also the director of Altman Advisory. She is a professor of 4IR practice at the University of Johannesburg and adjunct professor at UCT, and holds economics degrees from McGill University, the University of Cambridge, and the University of Manchester. Our second panelist is Isaac Macheko, and he is a senior economist in the Group Economic Unit, Nedbank Group. So he was previously with the Standard Bank Limited's Group Economics Division, Africa Desk, and Investment Solution Limited's Market and Economic Research Unit. And he holds degrees in economics from the University of Northwest and the University of South Africa, and a master's in commerce, specializing in development finance from the University of Cape Town. His research focuses on African economies, fiscal policy, and sovereign risk analysis, capital markets in developing economies, and development finance. Isaac is also a regular commentator in the print and electronic media. And last but not least, we have John Matthews, and he holds a BCom degree and an MBA from UCT, specializing in strategic management. He is currently the group CEO with the Garden Cities group of companies. His areas of interest includes the provision of housing and other social services to uplift the people of South Africa in a sustainable manner. Now, John is a prominent industry leader, and he is the chairperson of Construction Alliance South Africa. He's the past president of Master Builders South Africa and Master Builders Western Cape, CEO of the Archway Foundation, member of the Building Industry Bargaining Council, and member of the Audit and Risk Committee of the University of the Western Cape. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming all our panelists to the session. We are going to request the panelists to commence and provide a short introductory comment on the role of construction in the economic recovery of South Africa. And I am going to start with Professor Altman, and she will then be followed by Isaac and then John. So Professor Altman, it's over to you for your introductory comment. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, good to be here, and thanks for the introduction. So the topic was, what's the role of construction in recovery? And I think it goes without saying that construction in any country plays a critical role. It's a very obvious point. In any country, it plays that role in recovery and also rebuilding and development. So in construction, we know that it plays a critical role both directly and in terms of stimulating supply. And certainly a big contributor to starting to turn that around will be the reversal in the fallen state expenditure and certainly getting building going as well, not just in infrastructure, but in building. So for example, getting housing spending moving and strengthening municipal capability to deliver on maintenance and similar. And then of course, there's a longer range view, which was not the topic of this particular seminar, which focuses on renewal and development, and certainly construction plays a role in that as well. And we need to start seeing, you know, a greater commitment to the path of the NDP. Now, I just want to say a few words about the NIP 2050, which was released for public comment on August 12, and I would like to encourage stakeholders to submit comments. We are receiving them, and we hope to get them as soon as we can, so we can review that. I have the role of lead drafter, so I've been bringing together the document for Infrastructure South Africa. And so what I think about this, I probably have over my 5 minutes already, but what I personally think about it is therefore in that document. Now that particular document focuses on 4 sectors, namely electricity, freight transport, water, and telecommunications. And there will be a follow-on NIP that also looks at municipal services, but we divided the two given that they're quite different. Now, the critical message that we've had from the construction sector has been that construction will be enabled if the state has a robust project pipeline that is sustainable and has the capacity to execute on it, that would make an enormous difference to the health of the sector itself. In the NIP, we have a full section that deals with how to restore dynamism in construction so that it can play this critical role. What we don't want to see is vastly expanded construction spending and then it goes to foreign firms. We would really, it's not that we don't want any foreign firms, but we certainly want the bulk of it to be stimulating our local industries, both construction and all the supplier industries, and extensive multipliers that I'm sure the BER report will be highlighting. So the themes in the document and the emphasis of this document is to strengthen the capacity of the state around what we call knowledge services. So everything from planning, procurement, engineering capability, the way that the industry speaks about needing to have the state become a better client. Now, that's not language the government uses, but it is certainly language that one hears in the industry. So everything that would make the state a better client with project oversight, capability around procurement, ability to partner in private finance, the stabilization of executive management and oversight of SOEs, that whole area of capability is the focus of this National Infrastructure Plan. It also speaks to transparent reporting. So when we think about delivery, critically, we want to see transparent reporting on the project pipeline. What's being tendered? What is the project pipeline? Who's won awards? How far is the project progressed? Is going to be really key to ensuring accountability and success in that project pipeline. And then finally, one of the critical things about the NIP, and this was required by Cabinet before we issued it. And I say that because I think it's heartening that this was a requirement of Cabinet before the document was released. So they sent us back to do this work before it was released. And that was to have a very clear 3-year plan, even in relation to strengthening regulation, institutional capacity in all of those areas. And secondly, recommendations around the strategic infrastructure projects, in other words, the SIPs. So we remind people what the SIPs currently are, and then we make recommendations for the augmentation of that list. So if that's approved, that gives a lot of clarity for where infrastructure spending is going to go. And when we get to the second round NIP, probably mostly going to be implemented towards the end of the year and in the first half of next year, then you'll start getting more clarity around the expectations around municipal services and construction and investment. So these are just some practical, we have a range of practical recommendations in the document. We would urge you to review it and read it and give us feedback. And these are the things that I think personally have to be done to ensure that construction plays this role that we need to see in the country. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Professor Miriam. I think it's heartening to note that with the NIP, construction will be enabled if the state has a robust pipeline of projects. And I've picked up that you are saying that it's key to ensuring accountability and success. So thank you for that. We're quickly going to move on to Isaac Macheko. Isaac is joining us telephonically due to some technical glitches. So over to Isaac. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And apologies for all the grumblings with IT, the sign of the times. So I have basically missed the start of the session. So my input will definitely, most probably, cover what has already been discussed. But there is no doubt that the construction sector will have to be one of the sectors, or actually at least the leading sector that is going to drive the economic recovery. Because if we can just look back at the pace of infrastructure development in South Africa, it's quite clear that we have fallen back as a country. We can go back to the mid-2000s when ASGISA was introduced. The target then was to boost infrastructure investment to 25 of GDP. We did peak at around 18%, and that was at the time of the World Cup construction boom, but since then we've seen a significant decline in the contribution of fixed investment spending, particularly by the private sector. We've also seen, for instance, the public sector post the World Cup cutting back on its infrastructure spending, and that has overall had a negative impact on economic growth, because we do need to catch up with our infrastructure development. So there's three issues I just want to touch on when it comes to infrastructure investment and getting the construction sector actually to make a significant contribution to economic growth in South Africa. The first is, we have to find innovative ways of financing, because surveys show that we rely a lot on traditional ways of financing infrastructure. I can quote one survey, which is Campbell, conducted by the G20, and it basically highlights the point that in South Africa we are highly dependent, or still dependent, on debt financing of infrastructure instead of, and I'm talking here about the public sector, instead of getting the private sector to contribute more through equity financing, we still relying on the public sector really raising debt financing for infrastructure, and that is going to be a big problem in future. I mean, in the current fiscal state, which is quite tight, we talked a lot about the government having to keep the increase of its expenditure under control, having to reduce its debt burden. So that simply means that, we've got to find an appropriate way or measures to find that balance between the public sector and the private sector when it comes to infrastructure development, and focusing definitely on public infrastructure. And that, of course, brings in another issue: how will that be paid for? We need to promote the user pays principle in South Africa, but it's been a political hot potato due to other issues. Our society really having low confidence in public officials. So making gains on the governance front and improving business confidence and also consumer confidence will definitely help to improve the level of payment by at least those who can pay. And the third issue I wanted to highlight is inclusiveness. The small, medium, and micro enterprise sector really often feels excluded from the big construction project. And it will be quite important as a country going forward that we find a way of really including the SMMEs, particularly those owned by the previously disadvantaged, because in that way that we will be able really to get infrastructure spending going. So those are the points I really wanted to highlight, but there is no doubt that the construction sector will have to play a significant role in the economic recovery, because the traditional sectors quite soon will run out of steam. What do I mean by that? Right now, growth is really being boosted by mining exports, and the commodity cycle is not going to last forever. Once it normalizes, which could happen in 2022 or even 2023, we will have to get this economy going based on domestic levers of growth, and reviving the construction sector will be quite important. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Isaac. I think points well made. You've touched on the pace of infrastructure development, the innovative ways of financing, particularly interesting for me, the user-pays principle, and of course, the inclusion of SMMEs. On that note, we're going to move on to John Matthews for his introductory comments. Thank you, John.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you to the previous panelists introductions. And at the risk of wanting to repeat some of the issues that have been raised, Professor Altman, I'm actually going to, part of my introduction is referring to your NIP 2050 that you're talking about, which I think is really important, not just from a public perspective, but certainly from a private enterprise perspective as well. And the issues that I'm referring to is basically saying that the government raises this in their 2050 document. They claim that the conditions to be met to ensure infrastructure spending are the state must operate its delivery and procurement management processes to create certainty and confidence. Now that's quite important because I think we are pretty much running at a very low ebb at the moment in terms of confidence, and we need to create this confidence within not just the construction sector, but certainly within the entire economy. The second point is that workflow must be consistent and must enable companies to plan and structure their work and make decisions around capital and human resource investment. We must be careful that we don't end up in a situation that we don't just want the government to make investments. The private sector needs to make the investment as well. And there needs to be a holding of hands together to get us out of this quagmire that we are at the moment. The third point is regulations and the process of issuing permits must be streamlined. That refers to the regulatory framework which we have, which is really not working at the moment. And we really need to make a concerted effort, both at, or I would say at all three levels, that's being at the local authority level, the provincial level, and certainly at government level, to try and really dig deep into this regulatory framework that we have, which is not encouraging investment and growth within our economy. And then the second last one is the professional capacity must be available and skilled with experience. We have a huge problem again, the lack of skills. And when we do turn, and I hope that's very, very quickly, we are supposed to be having the necessary skills and experience within the industry. And there again, it's a collaborative effort between public and private partnerships to actually obtain those skills or to skill our unemployed people, which we know that that is a huge problem and we need to work at that constantly. And then lastly, and you alluded to this in your introduction by saying that there must be an explicit commitment to building SA Inc. civil construction and supplier firms. And I think that's very, very important. If we do not do that, we will end up continuing into this situation of unemployment and then employing foreigners with foreign skills and not growing our economy in terms of the unemployment that is so bad, and we really need to tackle that as an issue. So in conclusion with my introduction, I'd like to say the talk must be transformed from talk to deed. Otherwise, we are failing in getting the economy to kickstart through the construction industry. And Edward West calls it implementation paralysis. We are paralyzed with rules and regulations and all the other issues that we are faced with before we get to actually creating the employment that we badly need. The employment is a ticking time bomb. And previously it was youth unemployment. It's no longer youth unemployment. It's very plain and simple now. It's just unemployment, period. The long term is great, but the short term crisis that we currently have cannot be ignored. And we have to deal with these issues in the short term so that we can create much longer sustained growth in the long term. And in conclusion, we have to get Eskom sorted. It continues to be a thorn in our proverbial flesh of the industry. We cannot build a platform which does not support growth, but creates uncertainty of investment. We have to deal with this and get it sorted out as soon as possible if we want to create the employment and get the construction industry and the economy to start showing positive numbers. Thank you very much, Vicky.
Thank you, John. So yes, digging deep into the regulatory framework, building skills and experience, and definitely longer sustained growth. Those are the messages coming forth from John Matthews. Ladies and gentlemen, before we move into some further discussion, we want to take you through this quick World Economic Forum video clip on shaping the future of construction. And then this will set the tone for further engagement. Thank you.
We cannot hear the sound on that side. Vicky, can you please assist?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Talissa is just dealing with that. Talissa, can you start that again, please? Unfortunately, I think the sound is still off.
If I can quickly jump in here, I think, Talissa, when you share your video, there's a little tick box on the share screen from the system, and you can just click share my sound, and then we should be able to hear everything.
No, to chat.
Infrastructure and urban development. The world is confronted with many challenges that impact the well-being and happiness of society. Among the most severe are fast urbanization, climate change, and resource scarcity. To address these challenges in infrastructure and urban development industry, the World Economic Forum established the Shaping the Future of Construction project. But what will the future of the industry look like? How best prepare for it? The World Economic Forum, in collaboration with the Boston Consulting Group and together with global infrastructure and urban development leaders, developed 3 scenarios of the infrastructure and urban development industry's future. One is a world in which virtual reality touches all aspects of life and intelligent systems and robots run the construction industry. Another future could be a factory-dominated society in which prefabrication and modularization are used to create cost-efficient building structures. Or a third scenario, the world will face severe climate change and depleted natural resources, which urge the infrastructure and urban development industry to use earth-friendly construction methods and sustainable materials to rebuild nature. Current business models, strategies and capabilities of players in the infrastructure and urban development industry will not be sufficient for any of these future worlds. But there are 6 no-regret moves all infrastructure and urban development companies can take to prepare. 1. They must attract new talent and build up the required skills. Widening the sourcing of talent and improving the industry's image can help. The companies should also provide more modern workplaces and opportunities for learning and development. 2. Infrastructure and urban development companies need to enable change management and adaptiveness. This requires agile working methods and flexible organizations. 3. Furthermore, they need to implement digital models and data usage throughout their processes. 4. They must also adopt innovative technologies at scale. It's important to innovate in new ways and integrate new technologies. 5. Infrastructure and urban development companies need to increase integration and collaboration across the value chain. 6. Companies must also constantly identify the most promising products and market segments while embracing new businesses.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Talisa. Okay, and then moving on, we're going to go into one of our first discussion items, and that is the industry position to stimulate economic recovery, and what do you identify as the catalyst that will position it more effectively? What are the challenges or stumbling blocks that will hinder the industry from contributing effectively to the economic recovery process, and how will this be overcome by the sector? So quite a loaded point, and if we could just ask the panelists to please come in. We can start with it being voluntary.
Vicky, let me have a go at it.
Yes, thank you, John.
Okay, so I think challenges and the stumbling blocks, as I've mentioned, perhaps one or two of them, is really the regulatory framework. We can, you know, the employment can be created, the investment can be created both on a public level and at a private level. But we have to deal with the regulatory framework. And I mean, there are numerous examples, and on personal experience, I can give you numerous examples of things being delayed because government sectors are not aligned and understanding what it means to have or to perform so that we can have economic growth. We tend to have a problem whereby we still don't have alignment from government sectors in saying we need to align with the private sector, and we need to, as speedily as possible, approve projects, get projects off the ground as quickly as possible so that we can get the private sector involved. And with them, the allocation of work is but one of them. But the quicker we allocate work, the quicker people can start creating employment and get jobs going. And that's the important thing. If we're not having jobs, we continue to have the problems that we've seen in the last few months, and we will continue having those problems. That's certainly from my side. I think we need the government to get going on the allocation of the projects, and then tied to that is streamlining the regulatory framework that we're working within so that we can get approvals through the process as quickly as possible. Even where there are projects from a private sector perspective, these things take too long. When you talk to local authorities or provincial government departments, they just take too long to get going. And now with the advent of COVID, it's become 10 times worse. People working from home, we're having excuses that people can't do their jobs because they're working from home. It's just not acceptable that we have officials not doing the jobs in the first place.
Okay, thank you for that, John. Miriam, would you like to come in?
Yeah, sure. I think that John is right, but I'd just like to say that I think the most essential thing in driving growth is to have demand. Because with demand, you kind of find your way around it. Even when regulation is not in your favor and there are all kinds of other problems, it's really the project pipeline. And this is what I was saying about government becoming a better client. And of course, there's also a private sector that generates demand when there is more faith in the economy, and when the economy is just generally growing. It's kind of what economists call a derived demand. You know, this is why we had this focus in the NIP, is that it really is incumbent on the state at this point to get its spending moving in a way that's clear, that generates expectations and gets things moving. And I think that people find their way, you know, there's lots of problems, but people will find their way around it. The first order problem is to get the money flowing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So you're touching on demand-led growth, very important. And in the interest of time, I'm actually going to move on to the next question, which is then going to be directed to Isaac. So Isaac, if you can hear me, the next issue is the COVID-19 pandemic and the recent unrest has impacted negatively on investor confidence. Now, construction is an investment-led sector, So how do we attract investor confidence, and what then can be done to improve business sentiment?
Okay. Hello?
Thank you. We can hear you, Isaac.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. I got the gist of the question is how do we attract investment in South Africa going forward? Because definitely we will need partnerships to bring that technology that we haven't developed as yet in the country. Unfortunately, right now, with recent events, the mood is quite low. But I do believe that we can revive confidence. We are seeing, a green shoots of macroeconomic reform with the government, raising that ceiling for a better generation. But we are definitely looking for more announcements from the government in order to bring back that confidence that it is committed to get growth going. We need to focus, for instance, on our labor market issue. The International Monetary Fund a couple of weeks ago had a piece really urging South Africa to address the labor issues, making it easy to hire people and also facilitating training and all that. So I always argue that we need a big bang approach. We need to do everything right now. We really need to accelerate our reforms because we have fallen behind, and the corporate founders having run out of money and made the situation quite difficult. So, I'll keep spreading the message that government needs to cooperate with the private sector, of course, because development is a communion between the public sector and the private sector, and we need to boost confidence in this economy, open it up, not only for foreign investors, but also make it easier for domestic investors to do business here.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Isaac. Yes, definitely accelerating reforms and making it easier for domestic investment. I think that's important. Professor Miriam, can you perhaps tell us if these issues are then covered in the NIP 2015, and is that what it seeks to derive?
Sorry, I'm talking and I'm on mute. Mm-hmm. Look, the issue with COVID-19 is firstly that, when you go down, you hopefully rise faster. So hopefully we're going to see if we can get a better flow in construction in particular, which is the easiest way of stimulating growth right now. We would hopefully see a boost in the economy. Secondly, to generate confidence is actually within our power to do. There's so many things that are not within our power to do. We can't control the pandemic, for example. But the things that we recommend in the NIP are in our power to control. And it really is incumbent on not just the state, but civil society to make sure that it happens, which is why we need the comments and why we need the attention to the stuff, and why we have to be sure that people don't lose faith. In terms of investor confidence, as I say, if the state, I'm speaking about state-led infrastructure now, of course, there's plenty of private sector investment right now, which leads currently. But the state's really got to pick up its role in this. The first thing, of course, is that demand needs to move, as I was saying earlier. The second thing is that if there is going to be more private finance, which is absolutely required, then there's also going to have to be a pickup in the ability to collect revenue in key areas, service delivery areas, related to water, energy, anything that requires cost recovery, because it's very hard to raise money in that regard. So can we build confidence? Well, there's a global pandemic. Everybody's facing this, and there is certainly a domestic opportunity given the needs and the potential for investment in South Africa to use it as a stimulator that does attract investment. Certainly, investable capital is looking for opportunities globally. So it's within our power to do it. And this is why the NIP becomes so important, because it's an absolute doable, these things.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, Professor. We're going to move on to the next question, and this one's for you, John. So, John, what is your prognosis on the sustainability of the South African construction industry? And that's considering the link between economic recovery and sustainability. So in other words, there's a school of thought that says the economy comes first, the sustainability follows, and there's another school that says sustainability first and the economy follows. So what is your prognosis then, John?
Yes, Vicky, very interesting. Yeah. The question at the moment is, I think, standard or, the sort of standard methodologies in terms of economic models is out the window. It's been out the window for a few years as far as I'm concerned. So what we learned about Adam Smith and all the basics of demand and supply, yes, they are basic, but I think there are other imperatives, as you quite rightly say. What is it? Is the economy recovery? Which one comes first in the sustainability? I think at the moment, the problem is jobs, jobs, jobs. We need to create jobs now, not 3 years from now, not 6 months from now. We need to create those jobs now. So the imperative must be, at this stage, economic recovery. And that is what everybody must work towards. There needs to be an alignment both in the public sector and in the private sector about the creation of work. And it's simple, because people, we often get talk, and even in listening to the chats here, we often talk about the fourth industrial revolution, and some people are even talking about the fifth industrial revolution. That's great. I'm a techie myself. But at the end of the day, is South Africa ready for the fourth industrial revolution with 32% unemployment? If our youth is running at 40–50% unemployment, are we ready for the industrial revolution? And does the fourth industrial revolution itself enhance jobs? Does it create work? Does it create the general worker and laborers' jobs at the end of the line, whereby people can get an income and people can live from a day-to-day, I suppose, on a day-to-day basis? That's, to me, is the critical part at the moment. Yes, sustainability will carry, and we talk about economic sustainability, we talk about green building, we talk about alternate building technologies. All of those technologies, all of those platforms that we talk about, if they are not contributing towards the creation of employment, we will continue to have the struggle that we're having, and we will see a lot more devastation in our country than before. But we certainly need to put a stop to that unemployment number. And so I would say the economic recovery at the moment trumps sustainability. It may be different in 6 months' time, it may be different in 12 months' time, but at the moment, guys, it's work, work, work. That's what we need to create. And everybody needs to align to that ethos.
Thank you, John. Very interesting perspective there. So what I want to do is just change the order of things slightly. I'm going to take a few questions from our delegates, and we're going to move into the Q&A session before I allow the panelists to do their closing comments. As I can see, the questions are starting to come in. So guys, if you could type your questions in the Q&A box, not in the chat function, please. The questions are being screened, and we do encourage your active participation. Please bear with us if we're not able to take all the questions because we have limited time. I think there's a question here from Andreas Keba, where he says cutting red tape, reforming regulations, and creating more coordination between government departments have been highlighted as critical issues for several years. What is holding government back from implementing these suggestions? Do we need more studies and investigations into what specific reforms or interventions are required? Or is the key question not why government has not implemented previously highlighted suggestions until now? I think that's a very loaded question, but lots of aspects coming out there. And I'm not going to direct it to any particular panelist. Maybe first, can we have a taker from the panel, please? Miriam, perhaps you want to give this one a shot. It's it's more along the lines of your work.
I think that's been the, that's been the subject of the NIP as an example, not only, but this is where the National Planning Commission was certainly weighing in last year, and I presented to your group quite a few times last year on the work we were doing. And step by step, the issue is to improve accountability where there are commitments, which is why we're suggesting open monitoring and databases, and making clear as to what would be expected. The detail of cutting red tape, of course, is not really what we were looking at, but you just have to keep pushing. And it certainly is on the agenda. I mean, Cyril Ramaphosa has made a commitment to, for South Africa to move up the ranking of being a good place to do business. And, when I often say, when you've got a free voice and you're not thrown in jail, when, if you're in a country that you're not thrown in jail, where you can say anything about the president or anybody that is constructive and keep hammering away, you really have to. You have to keep pushing to get what you need.
Yeah, thank you.
It's the only way.
Whilst you're on the floor, Musa Shangasi, who is the Vice President of Master Builder South Africa, is asking a question to you directly. In your opinion, do you think the NDP has delivered in the construction sector?
Well, let's reframe that question. The NDP was a plan that was meant to guide progress. Now, people could say, well, it's just a plan. The NPC, firstly, was an advisory body. The NDP is meant to give broad direction. If the NDP had been implemented, I think we would see a different result. So even many of the things that are in the NEP are really follow-ons from the NDP, further developed down the road, 10 or more years later. So has it delivered? It's not the issue of whether the NDP is. Do you feel that what was in the NDP was compelling? Do you think, as a follow-on, that the NIP is really like an infrastructure NDP? So do you think that the NIP, let's try again. We went through 10 years where, the effort was not really to develop. The effort was to steal in the public sector. And we can see that across the SOEs, and that is not the main goal now. So let's try again. Let's pick up and let's try again. This is the history of all countries of, moving forward, moving back, and just trying to move forward again. So do you think that the NIP as almost like an NDP for infrastructure going forward is compelling? Is that you have a chance to comment on it now and be clear and specific? And let's try. Will this stimulate? The reason that the construction sector has been damaged over the past 10 years is not because of the NDP. It's because there was an objective goal to dramatically reduce capacity in the state to steal. It's a different set of issues. It's not the NDP that one should be worried about. It's the governance and executive oversight, which were actually recommendations made in the NDP that were obviously not followed up because there wasn't a desire to follow them up. And this is where civil society voice, this is why corrupt activity was taken down, was because we have free voice in this country, Maverick and free press.
Okay. Thank you for that, Marian. I'm sure that's answered Musa. We have two questions here from Louis Kruger, and the first one centers around the fact that the important question that needs to be answered is, during this webinar and a number of other webinars, our panelists agreed on what must happen and why it must happen. But for instance, how are we going to approach the local governments to act with urgency and capacity to attract investments? So that is his question. And he goes on to ask, how do you employ millions of people with no skills and being unemployed for 2 to 3 decades? John, can we ask that that you give that one a shot? You did touch on skills issues during your opening.
Yeah, fine, no problem. I think that's probably a key question, and Professor Altman raised it earlier on. If we give up and we stop hoping and we stop planning, we have a problem, because then it's too late. And I think we need to understand, and exactly what she's alluded to, and she said, the planning for the last 10 years has been around, for a want of another name, looting rather than growing the economy. And if we ignore that, we have a problem, because then we are not participating in regrowth of the economy. So how do we do it? We do it by small increments. Everybody has to partake in it, whether it is creating ESDs, whether it is creating a apprenticeship scheme at a low level and you take on one apprentice at a time. What we tend to do is we tend to think big, and we tend to think big companies, and we tend to think that we need to employ 20 apprentices, and we need to, that's not the point. Everybody contributes to skills development levy. Everybody has got an equal chance to partake into those skills. The money is there. Nowhere in no webinar has anybody said that the country doesn't have money. And this is the problem. We've got money. It's how we spend the money and where we spend the money. And I think that's what NIP 2015 is trying to achieve. Is saying, guys, it's not that we don't have the money. We got the money, but we need to spend it in the right places. And the old saying of a journey of 1,000 steps begins with a few steps. That's where it is. You as an employer have to make a concerted effort to employ ESDs, enterprise development. You've got to make a concerted effort. And yes, the failure rate is 80%. That's what the failure rate is for people starting out new businesses. So be it. For every 10 people you're going to create a small business for, 8 will fail. But the 2 that succeed will create more employment. So we mustn't stop giving up, because that will be a problem. I think I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you, John. I see Peter Botha's question is along the same lines, but we've covered that. I'm going to move on to a question from Dion van Zyl, the chairman of the Western Cape Provincial Property Development Forum. Dion is saying that the level of regulation in South Africa limits entrepreneurial activities and investment. President Mbeki spoke about regulatory impact assessments. A decade later, we have more laws and regulations. We need to remove the volume of regulation in South Africa. Isaac, I'm not sure if you're still with us, but is that something that you can give us some insight into?
Okay, I take that you're asking me to give my final comments.
Isaac, no, it's the question. Dion is saying that we need to remove the volume of regulation in South Africa, and a decade later we have more laws and regulations, and that actually limits entrepreneurial activities and investment. Is it something that you can comment on?
Okay, I got the last part, but I believe that you are asking if maybe regulations and the dominance of large corporates are limiting the growth of small entrepreneurs. And my opinion on that is that, we need cooperation between the small players and the big players, because it is the big players who are going to capacitate the small players, particularly in terms of skills transfer. And of course, the small players also have to come together to create that, and they've got to come together on their own to create that capacity. But of course, if I can just go to that issue I raised earlier, that the business environment needs to be made easier for the smaller players really to have a chance, because there is a lot of red tape, particularly at the municipal level, and that needs to be addressed in order to help the emerging construction players to really have a chance of growth. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Isaac. Thank you for that insight. Ladies and gentlemen, in the interest of time, we are going to take the one last question from Roy Mnisi, the Executive Director of Master Builders South Africa. And I'd like to ask the panelists then to utilize this question and their closing comments together. We're going to give you a minute each. And Roy is saying that the problem is that the government plan alone. They want to try to implement alone. Is it not time that we push for being part of the planning and delivery? At the end of the day, we play for the same team, and that is Team South Africa. And then we have other delegates who are agreeing with Roy. They are saying it's time for government to stop centralizing decision making. Can we have your input then together with your closing? And we have about a minute each. Can we start with John, maybe the chairperson of CASA?
Sure. Oh, you caught me off guard there, Vicky. Thought I was going to be last again. I fully agree with Roy, okay? And I do think, and I must not speak for Professor Altman because I really do like the NIP 2050 idea. But I think that's the start, okay? The inputs that we're getting. The whole purpose of CASA was to create this body that have got the construction industry, all the construction industry bodies talking with one voice. Now, that's where we want to do. We want to make a mark, we want to make our footprint, and we want to be heard. And we want the government to understand that we are addressing the issue at various levels. We must also accept that it is impossible to have 36 industry bodies to be talking and to be agreeing on every single thing. That's not the intention. I think the idea is we must understand, yes, we are united on the same front in terms of when we come to macroeconomic issues that we're dealing with. On other issues, we will never be able to speak with one voice. But at least we are respecting each other's point of views, and we are able to go to the government and to address other institutions with one voice. There may be dissenting views, so be it. It's 36 viewpoints that you're trying to take in one voice. But at least there is a port of call that the government can come to and say, guys, we think this is something that we want to tackle. Is the good idea or is the bad idea? You can rather have 36 associations or organizations giving input and with one voice, rather than saying we're going to have to talk with dissenting views. So I fully agree. I think we need to partake, and we need the government to engage with us, the industry, on a much broader level to try and find some common purpose. Not find the common purpose, but more importantly, to execute the common purpose. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Miriam, can we move on to you?
Yeah, sure. I think Roy is spot on. And that is why we put so much emphasis on it in the NEP, actually. And when we try to understand that, it's not just about wanting to centralize. The reality is that 2% of public infrastructure is currently financed by private finance, and that is mostly office expenditure. What it means is that we don't actually have capability to do this thing, and we need to do it. The NIP has a vision of saying we think that by 2050, about a third of public infrastructure spending, it probably should be privately financed. So that means we need capability in the state to finance it, and we need capability to partner. And what we're trying to highlight in the NIP is to understand this as a capability. It's a willingness, of course, and a desire to do it, and the need to develop the capability and step by step get better and better at doing it. So Roy is absolutely on point when he's saying we have to be thinking about how we do this together. And then remember that it's a mindset, and it's also a set of capabilities which just aren't there right now. You know, plus obviously a regulatory framework, a procurement framework, but you also need the human capability and the institutional capability and the willingness. So that's what that's one of the things we're trying to drive. It won't change 100% tomorrow, but I do hope that if and when the NIP is approved, that there would be more effort going forward to start following down that path more meaningfully. So
thank you for that. Thank you. Thank you very much. Isaac, can we quickly get your closing comment? think we may have lost Isaac. So
Sorry,
let me just. Oh,
Vicky,
yes.
is there, I think.
Okay,
Sorry, Isaac, continue.
Yeah, I didn't get the sound wasn't really clear, so I didn't get most of what was said. So
Isaac, can you?
I won't be able to add to that.
No, that's fine, Isaac. Can you just round off? This is your closing comment, please.
Sorry, Isaac, can you hear me?
Yeah, was that a question?
No,
Can you please repeat it?
they're asking for closing comments and to round off.
For closing comments. Okay. Okay, thank you. Okay, apologies about that. My closing comment will definitely be that, the construction sector, which in some quarters is regarded as an old economy sector, remains very important for a country like ours because we are behind when it comes to our development. We know definitely that infrastructure development is delayed in South Africa. We've seen infrastructure crumbling in some municipalities in particular, and until we address that, we are not going to be really able to take the advantage offered by the higher value sectors, if I can call them that. Infrastructure investment, i.e. construction sector, very important across the board. We know that all sectors, whether it's services or production, need stable infrastructure. And we need to really focus on that as a country. Cooperation between the public sector and the private sector is very important. In particular, the public sector needs the skills from the private sector. That knowledge transfer and the help that can be extended is really important. Thank you.
Thank you, Isaac. Yes, we definitely need knowledge transfer, and I think that's something all sectors need to work on. Sia Dilimeni, thank you for your question. Yes, I'm going to take that one. The CETA is definitely working with CASA. We're sitting with a memorandum of active partnership, which we're looking at between CASA and the CETA. It's work in progress, so we are taking that forward. And we've noted also the comment then from the president of the BBCBE. He says, I agree with reserving the jobs for our locals and discourage industry players from prioritizing foreign nationals in terms of jobs. However, we need to start defining foreign beyond accent and race. So thank you. That comment has been noted. In the interest of time, we're now going to round off, and essentially what I think I do want to say then, ladies and gentlemen, that the panel discussion was extremely valuable and perspectives were shared on a range of issues. Thank you to our panelists for all their outstanding contribution and input. I think on a lighter note, it said that economics is explaining tomorrow why the things predicted yesterday didn't come true today. It is, however, clear that construction is a driver of economic growth and job creation. It is imperative to build and maintain a sustainable construction industry, which then supports and stimulates economic recovery. A unified and cohesive approach will definitely pave the way through effective social dialogue between all relevant stakeholders. So it is imperative for the South African construction industry to drive economic recovery and sustainable growth and development together. We have noted, ladies and gentlemen, that infrastructure always booms post-pandemics and has proven to be a driver for economic recovery. And I'm going to leave you with the words of Albert Einstein. It says, in the midst of every crisis lies great opportunity. Thank you to our panelists and thank you to all our delegates. Thank you once again. Over to you, MC.
Thank you very much. Oh, wow. What a wonderful, what a brilliant session we've had. Thank you very much, Vicky, and the members of the panel for the steering job that we have done, sharing the insights regarding the role of construction in the economic recovery. In the interest of time, I will not be able to do the summary. I'm hoping that we'll be able to have the recordings for those of us that might have joined the discussion a bit later, so that we can also be on the same level. Ladies and gentlemen, we took off our program with the opening remarks from our forever young and vibrant Mr. Gregory Mofokeng, who is also the Deputy Chair of CASA and the Vice President of the Business Chapter within the Black Business Council. I mean, no doubt that he did indicate and he did give us the insights of who CASA is, what does CASA stand for, what do we do, what do we believe in, the membership, and the role of a collective voice during these turbulent times of our sector. After that, we climbed towards the cruising altitude, and that was also under the guidance of our keynote speaker, Mr. Lembo, who was here to ensure that he provides us with a crisp analysis of the current state of the economy. And also, not only did he just tell us about the gloom day of what is currently happening in terms of the realities, but he also provided us with some of the hope that we so much need regarding what is it that needs to be done for us to be able to achieve the economic recovery. The hope for the future, as it has been aligned as the silver lining around that dark cloud. As the saying goes, alone we can walk fast, but together we can walk far. Therefore, we need each other. At the cruising altitude, we have been serenaded by our own Queen Vicky and the panelists. They touched on the actual and the practical proposed solutions that we could look at as a country and also as a sector that will assist us to navigate, once again, the turbulent times that we are faced with, evidenced by the unemployment rate of almost 50%. That's quite a lot. Our next speaker will then take us into the descent of this webinar by thanking everyone and also giving us his closing remarks regarding everything that has happened and ensuring that everybody who has made this webinar to become a success is actually being appreciated for the efforts that they've put in. By the way, this is the very, very first ever webinar that we are having as CASA, and I'm sure we would like to give a round of applause to the organizers and to the MENCO. Let me just introduce our next speaker. His name is Mr. Chris Campbell. Chris started his career as a draftsman some 40 years ago and went to obtain a higher technician diploma in civil engineering in 1986. After almost 10 years in the consulting engineering industry as a senior technician, he went on to obtain a BSc civil engineering degree, summa cum laude, in 1995 at the university in the USA. He has been registered as a professional engineer in South Africa since 1998 and has over time obtained various certificates and diplomas in management and leadership. He held senior positions in various consulting engineering companies, technical and management capacities in state-owned rail entity in South Africa, and executive management capacity in precast concrete manufacturing and supply company before being appointed as the CEO of Consulting Engineers South Africa in 2015, which position he still holds at present. His engineering institutional involvement has been in various capacities over the past 25 years, both locally and internationally, which notably include that of being past Vice President of the South African Institution of Civil Engineering, which is the SAICE, past President of the Engineering Council of South Africa, EXA, past Vice President of the World Federation of Engineering Organizations, WFEO, Chair of 2021 to 2022 FIDIC Directors and Secretaries Advisory Council. Ladies and gentlemen, let me hand over to Mr. Chris Campbell to take us through the closing remarks. Thank you.
Kili, thank you very much. I feel like one of these people with, you get these people who have 20 post-nominal abbreviations after their names on the business card. So you almost need to fold it over 3 times. Yeah, that was much more than I had intended for you to share publicly, but thank you very much. My closing comments, colleagues, is I cannot but just echo the sentiments that have been expressed by all of our speakers. In the Q&A, people from the panel, and the sense I got was that the time has come for us to be seen as an industry, and let's just take the industry itself. These are the companies, big business. We need to start exerting the voice that we have as big business. And then jointly, entities like CASA and the like were institutions, and will arguably, one may argue, say, fall in the realm of civil society. We need to all join hands and stop putting ourselves in a position where we stand and have to wait for government to decide on when and how things will happen and so forth. I think there's enough intention within government. The duality, unfortunately, does slow down the process within government. I think it's no big secret. I used to use the term of reference, our infrastructure development is moving at the glacial pace. I think a glacier is moving faster. There is definitely a need for speed. I think and to come to the point that was raised by John Matthews, is the need for urgency. There's an urgency here that for us, we've seen, you know, much as we all assume that, well, this was just an event over a few days and so forth. You know, the looting and rampant whatever happened that shouldn't have happened. If we don't address the ills in society, the corruption, get the process going of creating jobs rather quickly, I think, John, I would want to say sustainably too, because it doesn't help for us to have small short-term jobs. We need an economy that can have quick wins. Construction industry is one of those sectors that can provide that. There are a plethora of projects. There isn't a shortage of money for at least those projects. There's a shortage of money for a lot of the other projects, which I think, you know, we're going to have a lot more faith in our own country. If even local investors are not doing what, and many of you know Herman Mashawa's claim to fame, how his business became successful. The anecdote I'll share with you quickly was these hair products weren't selling, got some shelf space in a big retail, and all he did was go into that store and buy all of the stuff off the shelves. The minute people saw that, they started buying his products at lightning speed. We need to take that leap of faith in South Africa through South Africans if we are going to encourage foreign investors to do the same. And I believe that if business and civil society are joined with government in achieving this objective, the rest will follow. But certainly there is a need for decisiveness, and certainly as an industry, the perspective raised by Roy has to change. We can't be project takers only. We sit back and wait for the next tender or something like that. We have to be part and parcel and be at the table of the planning of the rollout. And at the heart of it is we've got to prepare our young people not for employability now only, but into the future. And that process has to start now, and it has to be a joint effort. So with that, colleagues, certainly in our country, in South Africa, what we need to do is stop being like the bird on the wire. You know, the bird on the wire that sat there and decided to fly. And 3 years later, it was still deciding to fly. And 10 years later, it was still deciding to fly. Like the NIP, like all of the other legislation we got, very excellent. We now need to execute. Let's get things done. Let's fly. Let's stop deciding to fly. So with that, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity. And I'd like to thank all of the sponsors and partners in this process, AfriSam, RIB, CCS, and our partners, Creamer Media, and our panel of speakers. Thank you very much to all the people behind the scenes who made this a successful event. Thank you too. And with that, I'm going to hand back to, I believe it's Vicky, or is it? There are apparently some final words.
I'm still the pilot. I'm still the pilot.
Thank you. I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure if you were the main pilot, the wing pilot, the gunner, or the. You're all yours, Kili. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm still employed here. Please don't take my job away.
I didn't fire you. You know, I'm not like the president of some countries. You know.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Chris Campbell, for reiterating the fact and the sense of urgency that we really need to start working on. Half the time we come to webinars, we come to conferences, we talk, and we do nothing about it. I'm very happy that there's currently some sideline discussions that are happening on the NIP 2050. And I'd like to urge everybody to really participate, because we cannot just become passengers that are just there in this vehicle. We need to ensure that we become active participants and change the course of our sector. As we're about now to go towards the conclusion of our program, we are finally approaching the landing strip for the touchdown. I hope and I trust that you have enjoyed our CASA hospitality and you've gained insight regarding the different roles that we all need to play in ensuring that this economy really, really does recover. As I'm now signing off from the seat of being the pilot of the program, allow me now to hand you over and hand you back to my co-pilot, Ms. Shannon de Rijhoff, from our sponsor, Creamer Media, who have been very phenomenal and very much generous towards us and putting together this webinar and even providing us with the platform for it, to introduce the CEO, who's going to ensure that at the end of the day, we close this webinar in style. From myself, you have been such a great audience and you've been such great company. I want to thank each and every one of you for the chats. I want to thank each and every one of you for the active participation that you have displayed. And before I even close, just want to say to all of you, this COVID thing is not just a COVID thing. It is a disease. It kills. So we all need to look after ourselves, keep well, look after yourselves, but I don't think I'll be doing justice if I don't get to leave you with a quote from our legendary Mama Charlotte Macheko, whom we are celebrating this year, as she has been in our lives or in the memory of our South African history over the past 150 years. She says, open quote, "This work is not for yourselves. Kill that spirit of self and do not live above your people, but live with them. And if you can rise, bring someone with you." From my side, please have a wonderful and a beautiful evening. I thank you. Over to you, Shana.
Thank you very much, Kile, for your very kind words. I really appreciate it. Before we close off, we do have a very important message from one of our sponsors, from RIB CCS CEO Andrew Scudder, and I call on him now to say a few words. Thank you, Andrew, for your input.
Shannon, can you hear me? Sorry, there seemed to have been a glitch there.
Yes, thank you. We can hear you and we can see you. Thank you.
Apologies for that. Yeah. So we're really pleased to be part of this and to support CASA in their first webinar. And I'm sure this is going to be the first of many engagements with the broader community. So we'd like to just share very briefly some of our thoughts around the role of technology in enabling construction in this journey of economic recovery. And we as a business, as RIBCCS, have a very clear mission that is really about driving digital transformation of the engineering and construction industry so that we can create an industry that is better suited, more efficient, more profitable, more sustainable to serve the economies that we operate in more effectively. So there's more to go around for generations in the future. The more we can build with the limited resources we have, the better our economy is going to be into the future. And so we as an industry face several challenges, in addition to the several that have been discussed today. One of the key challenges is this lack of productivity growth over the last couple of decades. And this is not only in South Africa, but this is a global metric where we've only grown by 1% per annum in productivity versus 3% across the entire economy. We also are faced with low customer satisfaction as an industry because of our ongoing failure to deliver projects on time and on budget. And we really need to sharpen that up so that we can get, as I've mentioned before, more from the limited resources we have. The third thing that is a key challenge for the industry is that we have a significant carbon footprint. In fact, the construction industry accounts for 38% of the global related CO2 emissions. And as a consequence, if we can design and build and operate buildings in a more efficient way, we'll have a significant impact on a big factor affecting all of us across the world. And then finally, we as an industry have been really slow at innovation and digitization. And this is borne out by us being one of the least digitized industries in the world. In fact, we're second only to agriculture and hunting. So we've got a long way to go to digitize our industry. But the fortunate thing is that there are technology solutions to these challenges. And these technology solutions are coming more and more to the fore. And the COVID-19 pandemic has actually accelerated the adoption of many of these technologies. And this slide depicts the future impact and likelihood of new technologies, from technologies like 3D scanning, drones, prefabricated construction capabilities, and really importantly in our life as RIBCCS is integrated BIM. And the impact, as you can see from integrated BIM, is quite significant. And this capability is right on our hands today in order to take advantage in our businesses. And we as a business have a solution called M2. And M2 is an integrated 5D BIM platform, which enables construction companies, project owners, project developers to manage the construction lifecycle from a plan, build, and operate space, where you bring in all these stakeholders in a project together to manage the various aspects of the project in one platform, which creates a backbone for your project, where you've got intelligent insight into the information that you have in your projects through business intelligence, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, and of course, BIM being a key driver of all of that. So I thought I'd share a short video with you to highlight a little bit more about how BIM can impact our industry.
This is our planet. This is us. These are the places where we live, work, learn, produce things, and entertain. We have a name for these places: buildings. While buildings house the world's 7.9 billion population, do we really know the industry we interact with every day? While $94 trillion in infrastructure investment is needed in the next 20 years alone, traditional construction methods cause tremendous waste and a huge carbon footprint. 38% of global annual carbon dioxide is produced by the architecture, engineering, and construction industry, which means 19 gigatons of CO2 needs to be reduced through joint effort. While the AEC industry employs 7% of the world's working population and contributes 13% of global GDP, the biggest industry is also the least digitalized one. As a result, 30% of rework performed by construction companies leads to 6 gigatons of unnecessary carbon emission damage to our Earth. We must change the status quo towards decarbonization led by digital transformation. M2 connects all stakeholders, processes, and data along the AEC industry value chain. From supply chain, planning, construction, to maintenance, M2 supports decarbonization throughout the building life cycle. Before a project's physical construction, M2 runs a detailed 6D building information modeling virtual simulation, connecting the 3D BIM model with 4D time factor, 5D cost information, and 6D carbon factor, so that stakeholders can optimize the design, schedule, and carbon emission while reducing rework and the waste of CO2-intensive building materials. As clean energy is being increasingly adopted by the AEC industry, M2 also connects their smart devices to further optimize energy use. By improving site logistics, supply chain, and business partner management with M2, the environmental impact of on-site activities can also be reduced, and CO2-intensive material waste can be kept to a minimum. Business partners that meet the green building standards will be connected to the platform, empowering building projects to achieve the best carbon footprint outcome. RIB and RIB CCS are teaming up to support large enterprises and SME in the industry and their related supply chain with cloud, software platform, and consulting services to roll out M2 to the African market. Sustainable building investment represents one of the biggest global investment opportunities of the next decade, with an estimated 24.6 trillion by 2030. 1% reduction in construction costs could save $100 billion globally. M2 helps construction projects achieve up to 30% overall savings, resulting in 6 gigatons of reduction in carbon dioxide. The M2 construction digital twin data will be the most valuable asset for the next level of decarbonization. From reducing carbon emissions in the midterm to achieving net zero as the goal, M2 supports the AEC ecosystem. Running together, we build a net zero future for the next generation.
Great. I trust that video gave you some insight into some really exciting technology that we believe can transform the industry and support the ongoing economic recovery of our country through a more efficient, more productive, and more sustainable industry. So thank you very much again, Shannon and the CASA team for this opportunity. It's much appreciated.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Your support of this webinar is really gratefully acknowledged. This now brings us to the end of our webinar. So I would like to take one final opportunity to say thank you to our speakers and to our panelists, which include Craig Lembo from the Bureau for Economic Research, Isaac Macheko from Nedbank, John Matthews, the CASA chairperson, Professor Miriam Altman from Altman Advisory, Chris Campbell from Consulting Engineers South Africa, and Gregory Mofokeng from the Black Business Council in the Built Environment, and also CASA Deputy Chairperson. Thank you to our panel discussion facilitator, Vikashni Harbajan, who's the Executive Director of Master Builders KwaZulu-Natal, which is the CASA convener. And finally, to our MC, Kelikile Mteto from Tando General Trading. Lastly, a grateful thank you to our sponsors, RIB, CCS, and AfriSam for making this webinar possible. I would like to say a very big thank you also to all the attendees for taking the time to join us to learn about the role of construction in the economic recovery of South Africa. I know our session has gone over the scheduled time, so we are very grateful for the time that you did spend with us. If you would like more information about our host, the Construction Alliance South Africa, please email them at info@constructionalliancesa.org.za. The recording of today's webinar will be sent to you in due course, and if you have any additional questions, please do be in touch. You can reach us at shannon@creamermedia.co.za. I thank you very much, and as Kile said, please stay safe, stay well, and goodbye.
Thank you, Shannon. Thank you, everybody. Bye.